to D&D Beyond. I'm Amy Dallen, and I am joined once again by one of my favorite folks to talk to or roll dice with. Welcome back, Sam to Leve. How you doing today?
Hey, all the better for seeing you once again from our respective libraries, both of which are equally
uh,
real.
they're real in my heart. Um, because I want to move into your backdrop is the implication there. But before speaking of getting distracted from things, how do we keep track of important information? That is the question of the day. Because today on our D&D Beyond live discussion, we're going to talk about taking notes. Now, taking notes is a time honored part of the RPG experience, but not everybody does it. And not everybody who does it, well, no one who does it the same way. So, we're going to talk about what works for us, what works for you and your table, and sorting out how that balance is going to go, and our tips and tricks and maybe favorite stories about writing notes in tabletop RPGs. Now, full disclosure, I am a lifelong note taker, but I am of the still working on making them the most useful variety. So I can give great advice on this point, but do I always follow it? Meh. And Sam, where do you come from on this particular issue?
Well, I know that there were some lovely people who paid attention during that, one class in middle school where the teacher went over with you how you should take notes properly and headings and organization. And while I salute those people, I am not among them. I have 6 different note taking methods for 6 different games. And I don't just mean, what I'm choosing to write down. Some of them are on paper. Some of them are on a tablet in a different piece of software. Others are typed on my desktop. I'm here every time. All of it is consistent. The note taking is nonetheless chaos. But I think such chaos has taught me that just like the best camera is the one you have with you, the best notes are the ones that you will take. And that the most valuable thing we can do in talking about notes is finding the system that you'll actually use and how to make it as useful as it can be given what you're doing.
That is beautifully put, and gets right out of the way one of the most important things about this topic, which is that the same advice is not going to work for everyone. It might not even be the same advice you want to follow from year to year or game to game. But there are lots of fun ideas to try in figuring this out. So, just to dive straight into it, let's talk who takes notes. Some tables will have a dedicated note taker. And that will sort of either evolve over time as you kind of notice who's doing it and whether they seem into it, or it will could be settled in a session zero. You could talk about, hey, by the way, I love taking notes. I love doing maps. I love keeping track of inventory. And you can divide and conquer in that way. I've noticed I tend to be at a lot of tables where there's sort of semi-overlapping note responsibilities. Those tend to be ones that work for me, where it's like, all right, me and this other person both kind of mapped this, and me and that other person both got that NPC's name, and that person and the other person both got the name of the town that I missed. And between all of us, we have everything we need to know. But Sam, what have you found for who takes the notes?
Most often, I have tables like the one that you described, and I think it's great because no two people will focus on the same thing, if only through their character lenses. You will engage with different parts of the story depending on what your character cares about pretty often, but also some people will grab onto a certain thing or idea and others get one. And dedicated note takers, blessed, beautiful creatures creating the archives of our friendship and story, will only get one. And of the things that is important is to make sure with the note taking responsibilities that the people who have the responsibilities are happy doing them. Some people have great pride in their immaculate note taking, and being able to share that with the group is a warm fuzzy. But for some people, while they are happy to take it on when they see that it needs doing, it can feel like that one group project that you had to carry all by yourself. And we never, as players, want to make someone feel that way. And so getting a sense of what players actually like doing, which can even be separate domains of note taking. In one game I have, one player does the timeline. So every single session, there'll be a one sentence summary of what happened. Other people collect plot hooks. Other people track important characters. And even note taking itself can, in so doing, be divided, even though most often I do have a bunch of people taking a bunch of different patchwork notes, and we just try to slam them together and hope someone remembered the name of that one guy in the tavern. Spoilers, we didn't. We didn't remember it. No one took it down.
Well, what I love is that you're kind of describing different ways of approaching note taking as if they are D&D classes. Where like the rogue seems to not be participating most of the time until they come in with a sneak attack because they got the like complete word for word transcript of the description of the puzzle or the dungeon, and like the cleric is just handing out gentle healing all the time with their note taking, and the knowledge wizard has gotten the name of everything, but absolutely no other practical information. I love this. That's great. And they might all be playing the opposite classes. But what note-taking class are you, chat?
What note-taking class would you call yourself, Amy?
Ooh. Druid, because it wild shapes and it takes on the properties of, I don't know. It might be an artificer that imbues all my little devices with their own special qualities, because I rely heavily on the fact I traditionally will have when I'm on my more together gaming jags, I have a different notebook for each game. And it's a big part of the experience for me as a gamer, which is getting out the right notebook has a lot of sense memory things of remembering the feeling of putting it away, of turning the page past the memories from last time, of where that are specific to that book, and at the end of it, I have sort of the dedicated, all right, I'm pulling out the brain that goes with this book. You can keep a copy of your character sheet in there, obviously. You can keep a lot of relevant other things. There are other times where it's just not practical. I'm at a con or something. I've got one notebook and it's going to do for everything that happens this weekend. But a big fan of the dedicated character notebook. And I tend to have a mix of useful in the moment and useful long term notes, which is another element when we talk about what you write down that we'll roll along to. But first, with the how, I do love a paper notebook. That plays to a lot of like, I've been gaming for a long time and we barely had word processors. So, there were a lot of paper notebooks involved. And it was habit forming. But I now love to supplement that with things like searchable documents. With, if you are inclined, there are note taking apps. You can use Google Drive, you can use spreadsheets if you're leaning that way. Or, of course, you can pop on over to D&D Beyond. And for an example, I pulled up the Great Bostini, who you'll all remember as part of our incredibly sensible party for a carnival example of making the most of a randomly generated party last fall. If I'm in game as Bostini, Sam, what's something that I might need to write down?
The name of the town you are in at the moment.
Which I didn't take any notes on in the moment, so I don't remember anything I established for that carnival. So we're going to say, I'm going to just pop it right down in other, but you have various categories. That we are in the town of looking around at household
Fellhaven.
Objects. Hellhaven? I love it. Sounds pleasant.
Sure.
Like
I said
nothing could possibly go
Fellhaven, and I
wrong.
love this so much. Perfect. Perfect. Let's go.
Took it in an infernal direction. It's going to autosave after a second, but if it hasn't happened yet and you're in the middle of typing so many notes, you can just manually save that right there. It's going to pop into my notes here. And I will notice as soon as I get out my mobile device and check that if my mobile device is syncing right now, those notes are going to come across to my mobile sheet. And our amazing app developers, look, I'm just very impressed by them because it's all very magical to me. They have made it so that your HP and other important things are going to sync across. Even if you're in airplane mode, when you turn it back on, your most recent changes are going to take effect on your character sheet. But to prevent the kind of chaos that you might expect would ensue while you are offline, you're not going to be able to add new notes in the app to your character sheet at this time, because that prevents me from getting a full paragraph in the app and 7 paragraphs in the desktop, and then it having to choose between them, and nobody likes that. So this is a very, very fun angle. If you happen to be sharing your character sheet, you will notice that the public version that other people can see of this does not have your notes in it. Um, Good to check on that one. I believe your description and your notes are going to be hidden there if you happen to be sharing those sheets around. But yes, I do. I love this. This is easy at hand. Uh, their mom isn't dead is the kind of thing that I would jot down, just as a reference to like, oh, remember to follow up on that. There was a backstory drop from a key villager. Mm, Um, yeah. So notes on these notes is that later on I would want to maybe clean them up, which is my primary notes problem, which is that I leave myself notes like that and I don't say who said it, how we found that out, or occasionally specify which character I'm talking about. Although usually with something like this you would know. And that's where cleaning up and sharing the notes can come into play. And Sam, you referenced that sometimes you'll have groups where folks are sharing across the results of their taking. Like, here's my one sentence summary.
Yeah, so sometimes I really love shared note collaborations, both among players and between players and DMs, because very often the stuff that DMs use for their materials can be directly ported, depending on their prep method, into something that's useful for players. If there's a big paragraph of exposition about exactly what is going on now, that a very, very important person is very nobly and sagely delivering from a thing that we have written out before the session as we planned it for him to say, then you may have players frantically trying to take down notes of everything in that paragraph. We will try. I will try. But if you wrote it as a paragraph, you are free to give that paragraph to the players that they might engage more directly with the role playing. And one of the things that I think is particularly important for note taking, specifically for RPGs, as opposed to classroom note taking or anything else, is awareness of the scene, being able to engage with it. And so, even when you have a dedicated note taker for a given thing, one of the things I also think is very important about who takes notes is if you can cover for someone who is in a scene that's very relevant to them, if they're very involved, take notes on their behalf so they have space to experience the role play. And it's one of the reasons I love collective note taking as an endeavor, so that it allows people to hand off long enough to really experience what we are here for, which is the role play.
Those interactions. So I love what you've suggested there because it plays as an important alternate to something I love that you said earlier. Because you commented before on how sometimes your notes can reflect your character, the kinds of things your character would be interested in or pick up on. That helps you reinforce the kinds of things they care about, and it helps you to express their personality, their interests, their choices, and sort of gets you into their headspace. But there's also, of course, an argument for covering and making sure to stay engaged with all of the people who aren't your character and might not have the same interests. And jotting down the things that matter to them, you can serve as great backup for them. If, let's say, they're very emotional right now and they forget to write down an important piece of information, then you have their back, essentially, and you can all cover for each other or occasionally laugh that you all spelled the name differently. You know, I've, whatever the results
It's
of
my
that sharing may be. Um,
It's my favorite mini game in RPG note taking. Guess the spelling before the GM gives it to you. You have met a dwarf named Baldrin. Is it Baldrin, Dren, Dron,
Are you an N?
Dryn, Drunn? Hadn't even thought. The possibilities are endless, but you all get a chance to guess before you get the answer. Note taking
And
mini
of
games.
course, bless new technologies, which make it easier than it ever used to be for the DM to straight up just share the spelling with the group, which just for me to be like, boy, sometimes I just appreciate technology. 'Cause you used to have to just actually spell that out, and it was tough. Um, let's see. So we've talked about how you take the notes. We've talked about who takes notes. We've talked about sort of making sure that the balance there is working for your party. Um, which elements do you find most useful to have written down? I feel like names are, of course, always going to be a big one.
Names attached to information,
Mm.
because I don't know about you, but if there is just an isolated name that I wrote down, I don't have the context. I try to, for my personal style, I actually do try to have some template because I like to know where I am, who I meet, and what I've learned from that interaction. So I'll start with where I am because usually you arrive to a place first, then you meet people. And in that process, you learn things, and then I don't have to do too much post processing. I actually just have like a little
Mm.
copy paste that I can spam over and over and then just fill in so that I don't have to do too much post processing. But if Baldwin is the blacksmith I met at the forge and told me where the manticore is, then hope it's not putting too much on myself after the game, because again, the best notes are the ones you actually take. The best processing is the processing you actually do. And so whatever eases that. For me, it's copy paste templates. For others, it might be something else. But that's what I've gotten. That's what I center on. And beyond those very core things, the GMs, well, sometimes they just have this interactable feeling. You know, like you're in the video game and that one object has a different texture because you can
Oh, yeah.
click on it.
Or a
Yeah,
person with an
it's
exclamation mark over their head.
interactable.
Yeah.
So anytime a GM describes something, you identify the interactables based on the things the GM is telling you, but sometimes the information has an interactable texture. There's some saying that someone just grabs and tells you and it makes absolutely no sense in the moment. Write it down because we have no idea why they're telling us this. So it must be important. If it makes no sense, that is when it most needs to happen. I got a random piece of Latin and I wrote it down because weird. Why did Latin just happen in front of me? And it's not part of my templates at all. But gosh darn, was it important that I remembered that Latin?
That was a very good game moment. I think I know the one you mean. But I in terms of what gets written down for me, my musts tend to be if I have the luxury of one dedicated notebook for a game or one dedicated note stock for a game, the musts are that I got to put a date down because I'm going to want to know if this happened a month ago or 6 weeks ago, or figure out where one day stops and the next one starts. And that's my must. Gotta get what even if you don't remember to add it till a couple days later, just get that demarcation down so you can start to navigate through. Um, and then there's sort of two types of notes. There's things that you're going to want to know forever for this campaign, and there's things that you need to remember right now in this exact moment. A lot of combat notes fall into that category. If you're not tracking, like depending on how you're tracking conditions, or if you want to keep in mind enemy conditions, you don't necessarily need a permanent note for that, but you might need a way to scroll down, right? Oh, yeah, the two on the left are prone. That's going to influence my thinking. You don't have to follow every detail. And later, you're just going to look at that page and it's going to be like 17, prone. And you may or may not know what that was about. But in the moment, it's doing what it needs to do. You can use that to track, like as a double check on your HP totals or amounts of healing or rolls, or doing a little quick math. But finding over time which things are really going to help you, I think it helps your play in a lot of ways. It can help you strategically to keep track of important information and make good decisions. It can also help you as a character if you jot down not just the blacksmith and the blacksmith's name, but blacksmith, gruff, or oh, blacksmith is a sea elf. I'm a sea elf. I might talk to them differently. Notes that might change how you are going to interact, how you are going to remember things, are the most useful to get down. So that's just another layer to add there. And of
And so if
course, if
there
you're,
are,
yeah,
I was just going to
go, go,
say,
go.
if there are the encounter notes and there are the session notes, There's also the one more level of Zoom that tends to be my signature note taking, the corkboard notes. Because session are things that happen in a given night that you want to remember. But the more than session note post processing, the away from table processing I do is a creation of a conspiracy corkboard. This is also part of note taking, and I know I'm making fun of it by the name, but finding ways to keep the big information of what's happening in the story. The Thieves Guild are connected, we learn, to the recent Hobgoblin encounters. It's a piece of information that might have been delivered to us in a session, but that we may not note take, we might forget about. Recording connections between different campaign elements. Look, it makes your GM very happy that you remembered that the thing was there. But also you can start to see into their plans and see connections between things and remind your fellow players, oh hey, this was in the thing with your backstory. This They were connected. It was the hobgoblins the whole time. So the different levels of Zoom are also a different approach to notes. Not everything is just like classroom note taking. There are other forms of notes that can be very helpful.
That's beautiful. And it speaks to the wonderful quality that RPGs have, that an RPG is happening in everybody's brain at once. But in one sense, you have that sort of beautiful, we are all describing an elephant together in tandem, but everybody's getting different pieces. And the sort of there are these beautiful campaign moments where suddenly everyone is making the same connections at once, and setting yourself up to have those in whatever way is most useful um, will be so rewarding for you as a player, so rewarding for your DM, of course, who has been carefully outlining an elephant and just desperately hoping it looks like an elephant once everybody else has their version of it together. Um, and that's achieving those goals of, oh, the same thing is happening in all of our brains as a result of this. It's just beautiful. And I will, okay, final thing is beyond just the notes you take for yourself and sharing them for information for each other. This also just we can't make a full topic out of it today, but it of course can lend itself to some of the best things you can do, which are other ways of sharing and elaborating on the game between sessions. So I've known groups who make their own wikis. I've known groups who share in-world fiction from the perspective of their characters. I've known groups who, obviously, many DMs will make amazing sort of recap documents, but players can do things like that as well. That all makes it feel very alive and feel very special if that's working for you and your group and is a reasonable thing that everybody can commit to in a way that makes sense for them. Sam, any fave examples of sharing out that world, which is, of course, so much easier with some notes?
Well, the one thing of world sharing away from table that I want to make sure I at least advocate for is an actual recording of some kind, because what we haven't touched on in note taking is accessibility. Sometimes notes aren't a thing that works for you. Sometimes their notes aren't happening for whatever reason, and having a phone set to record in the center of the table so that I can go back and listen to the thing that like I couldn't take notes. My brain was fried. My brain was so fried. Or any other reason can be really helpful to a party. Zoom recordings technology is lovely for many, many things. But if your table is finding note taking pressure too much for any reason, or you just want to listen to that whole paragraph of the exposition that the DM gave word for word, again, I do have to shout out recordings. It's not the same as like I do know that one group that wrote a whole novel and I read their novel and I cried. That's my favorite away from game fiction that
Oh,
I've ever seen created. They shouldn't let
I love
writers play
that.
role playing games, it's rude.
You can't stop them. I would say that that's definitely, like many of these suggestions, is going to be different. Your mileage may vary for you and your table, and you of course would want to make sure everybody is cool with having those sessions recorded. And it would be a separate question of whether you make those recordings available to other folks. But that
Oh,
is a
yeah.
great point. That is something we pretty much all have the technology to do. if that is a better form and helps everybody's memories. I love
It
that you brought that
saved
up.
me in
Thank you.
mystery games alongside the timeline of what happened in each session. You go, you listen to the particular thing, and then you know the scumbag is lying because they said something 30 sessions ago. And it's actually practical to get. Keeping
I feel the
receipts when the
binding DM
story gets
pressure
too
of
unwieldy.
myself knowing those things, but you know what? That you make a strong case. I have to de-luddite in many ways as I think about RPG options, and you make a compelling case for this. These have been our thoughts on taking notes in RPGs. What works for you? What works for your table? What are you able to stick with over time? And how do you find that balance with your other players and DM to make sure everybody's getting the most out of the time that you get to spend playing this game together? That's what it's all about. I would love to hear other people's tips. If you got them, drop them in the comments. And Sam, where can people find you for more?
You can find me as a role playing performer, variety streamer, and mischief goose throughout the internet. My schedule for which is on my Twitch About page on twitch.tv/Delevely, Delevely. See, maybe you had it in your notes. Who knows? And on Twitter at Tchaikovsky, Chaikovsky.
Excellent. We will see you next time on D&D Beyond.
It's D&D, D&D Beyond, yeah, D&D, D&D Beyond. You got your stats, you got your swords, and you got your invisible world.